Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our apologies for the delayed schedule as we had some technical difficulties earlier. But first of all, may I warmly welcome you to the Habibi Center's Talking ASEAN webinar. I am highly delighted to welcome you all in this first Talking ASEAN of the year 2022. Although COVID-19 situation has been significantly improved, social restrictions are still in place. Nevertheless, I am convinced that despite its virtual format, we will have a productive and fruitful discussion today. May I kindly introduce myself? My name is Taufan Samudra. I am one of the researchers of the ASEAN Studies program at the Habibi Center, and I will be your moderator for today's Talking ASEAN webinar on the topic of Russia-Ukraine conflict, ASEAN responses, and the possible implications to the upcoming G20 summit. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is a global threat to peace and stability and has prompted several responses, including from ASEAN and its member states. 2 days after the first attack, ASEAN released the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Statement on the situation in Ukraine, calling on all relevant parties to exercise maximum restraint and make utmost efforts to pursue dialogues through all channels, including diplomatic means, to contain the situation. Indonesia, as the 2022 G20 president, plans to invite all G20 members, including Russian President Vladimir Putin. Indonesia's decision to invite Vladimir Putin has created tensions and rejections from other G20 members. Every response given by the ASEAN member states would definitely affect on economic, political, and security in the region. Thus, mindful responses from Indonesia and other ASEAN member states are required to mitigate potential negative impacts during and after the Russia-Ukraine conflict. How Indonesia and other ASEAN member states should act regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict, what could Indonesia do to de-escalate the tensions? Therefore, given the various aspects that have to be covered to comprehensively discuss this very interesting and thought-provoking topic, we are highly pleased to have three distinguished speakers to join our session on this beautiful afternoon. First, we have Professor Effie Fitriani. She is a professor of international relations at the University of Indonesia. Secondly, I would like to welcome Professor Hikmahanto Juwana. He is the rector, Universitas of Jenderal Ahmad Yani. We are glad to have you back again at our event, Pak. Finally, we have Professor Makarim Wibisono, who is a professor at the Republic of Indonesia Defense University. As mentioned, I would like to thank our speakers today to spare their time despite their busy schedules. With that said, I hope we can start the discussion as soon as possible, as I believe a lot of us are impatiently waiting for this discussion to commence. But before we begin, I would like to briefly explain the procedure of our discussion today. Our webinar today will be divided into two sessions. Firstly, the presentation from our speakers, with 15 until 20 minutes allocated time respectively. After all the presentations are concluded, we will move on to the Q&A session. As you may know, this webinar is also publicly live streamed at our YouTube channel, and our viewers can ask questions or give any comments on the YouTube's live chat feature. Now that we have covered all the technical aspects, I would like to invite our first speaker, Professor Effie, to share her views on our topic of discussion today. As previously mentioned, Professor Effie is currently a professor of international relations at the University of Indonesia. She is the co-founder of the university's Master Program of European Studies, as well as the ASEAN Studies Center of FISIP UI. She is also the Indonesian country coordinator of the network of East Asian think tanks, which was set up as the track 2 of the ASEAN Plus 3. So, without further ado, I will give the floor to you, Professor. Please.
Thank you, Taufan. Good afternoon, professors, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to join you in this discussion to talk on one of the most pressing issues today, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. There are three issues that I would like to raise in this opportunity: conflict itself, ASEAN responses, and pressure on Indonesian G20 presidency. The first issue, Russian-Ukraine conflict, can be analyzed from several angles actually, and we have watched quite a lot of seminars. Almost every week we see the seminar on this issue. But I will observe it from the international relations perspective, in particular international politics. First, what we see in the media is the war, tragic war we can see in our lifetime. And we have seen a lot of casualties, a lot of demolished building, etc. From the media resources that I have engaged, uh, I have an information that actually what we have seen in media today is unbalanced pictures of the war itself, because actually it's one the ratio is 1:5 between the war itself is only covered by media one time, and the tragedy 5 times. So there are imbalanced information in the media about the war. So what we have seen as a war is actually maybe not as it is, because the media is quite not unbalanced, and because the media has been dominated by Western part. In Indonesia itself, my sources from the Antara Indonesia News Agency informed that the only media that have connection with Russian source is Antara, and the rest of Indonesian media actually didn't have access to the Russian media. So you can imagine what we have seen about the war in the media, whether it is online or uh, other traditional media. They are not really reflect the war itself. That's the first about the image of the war. The second, yes, we have seen what Russian did is a violation of human rights. It is a violation of the sovereignty of Ukraine, and it is the action that we cannot accept. And we understand there is international law governing this, and Mas Gihik will talk more on this. But we also have seen some politics behind the skin. I would like to go further to this behind the skin. External pressure on Russia is one of the things that we have to consider. It is about NATO eastern expansion and Russia insecurity. So a country will not do anything else, but it is because of the pressure from external and internal. And external pressure that we have seen in Russia now is from the Western countries and United States. And in this field, I just would like to remind that we are living in a changing international politics, and due to the redistribution of wealth, power, and influence, there have been a lot of new country, emerging powers, emerging economy, you name it, and Russia tried to revive under Putin too. So the world that we have seen today is quite different from the world after the Second World War, and it is actually a challenge to liberal world order created by United States and its allies. So we have to put this conflict in this context. Uh, Otherwise, we'll miss the meaning of the context itself. Actually, it is not the war between Russia and Ukraine, but between Russia and the Western countries, particularly the US and its allies. I'm sure the United States and its allies knew that Ukraine will be invaded. That they knew that Russian insecurity would drive the nation to launch aggressive military operation towards countries in its border. We have seen in Crimea previously, Georgia. My question is, why didn't they stop it? Why they have to put Ukraine and then Crimea in that kind of situation? If they, I mean, United States and NATO could stop Russia, who benefit from this conflict? The conflict absolutely already demolished Ukraine. It's also damaged Russia and its reputation, but it benefit Western military industries as well as gas and oil company from Western countries. With this in mind, we can see that who are in the under the pressure for this war. It is Ukraine, Russia, and the world, because of the rising energy price, food price, etc. If we see the response from Western countries, we can we could see the very imbalanced response from what happened in Ukraine and what happened in Middle East. For example, when the Israel's troops shoot people in the mosque in Jerusalem several days ago. There were double standards in this issue. So if the Western country condemn Russia of this invasion and problems, why didn't they also condemn Israel for what they have done for Palestine for decades? What I'm trying to say here is that the war is complex. It is not as simple as the media frame it. And also it's not as simple as the Western country said in many of their speech. Indonesia and other countries should learn lesson from this. The second issue is what ASEAN respond to the issue. For me, it is interesting, but it's not surprise. Indonesia, ASEAN countries, and other countries should learn from the Ukraine case that leaning to one particular major power when you are a country in the border of its competitor is dangerous. Indonesian bebas active foreign policy may be seen strange to the country, but the country does not depend on the protection of major power. But Indonesia has learned over the decades that no major power is actually protect you. They protect themselves. They seemingly protect you only if it is in line with their interests. We have seen it around the globe, in Middle East, in Eastern Europe now, in Africa, in Southeast Asia. We have seen it. So ASEAN as a security community is built to stabilize the region. So far, ASEAN managed to minimize conflict in Southeast Asia, except we have seen several incidents in Preaviar and some incident in the South China Sea. But all in all, we managed to create stability in Southeast Asia. But when ASEAN have to act externally and create ASEAN external policy, it is so problematic because the member country of ASEAN doesn't really share similar threat perception. Common security outlook is minimum, the lowest common denominator in ASEAN. It is because member country has different level of engagement with different external powers, including the US and the Russia. So it is not realistic to expect ASEAN to have one significant assertive voice on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. At the country level, we can see that each country react based on their interests. A close ally of the United States, such as Singapore, condemn Russia. But as a country that have a lot of problem with the US, for example, Myanmar, support Russia. So in between those two stands, other countries either keep silent because the issue is not priority for them, or responsible. They only respond mildly and unclearly to avoid being the supporters of any sides. I think Indonesian position is quite different here because inconsistent with Indonesian foreign policy of bebas aktif, we try not to be part of the problem by leaning to the United States or the Russia, but try to find a reconciliation way of the conflicting parties. Forcing ASEAN to have one voice is counterproductive, and because it even will damage ASEAN. And for what? There's nothing urgency. We have to have one voice. We didn't have one voice toward Myanmar. What could we have to have one voice toward this issue? What important for ASEAN now is to take lesson from the Ukraine case. That small country is very fragile if you lean to one of the major powers. If you take sides, you will have to bear the consequence. Now we remember Thucydides' dialogue, how people in Melos, have to respond to Sparta or Athena. They choose to be independent, which come to their demolish. but that for their pride and their uh, sovereignty. And we learned that major small country like Malian and like Ukraine have to adapt, have to act smartly, not to take side, but they have to. There's also a way to make rooms for to protect their sovereignty. I think Indonesian have shown some of the good example of this, and now this time it is another test for Indonesian free and active foreign policy. The third issue is about Indonesian G20 presidency. It is actually an unfortunate for Indonesia after all preparation that we have done for G20, all working group, task force, etc. We try to uh, build to be a successful presidency, and and then immediately the geopolitical issue raised. And the problem of this Russia and Ukraine war is not actually pressure for Indonesia. It is also pressure for G20 and the whole members in G20. Because the purpose of G20 is actually to be a forum to cooperate economically and extend to some issue outside the economic in order to stabilize the economy of the world and to prevent the world from another crisis after the crisis in 2008, etc. So if we stick with this purpose, actually G20 is even more important now than before, because after the pandemic and now the geopolitical crisis in Europe, the world needs a good and good cooperation among economic leaders to steer the economic recovery. So actually, we need the G20 now to work effectively. And Indonesian presidency already proposed three priority issues: global health, and the digital economy, and energy transition. Three issues they are deeply important for the economic recovery all countries in the world. But pressure from Western countries, United States, about to invite or not to invite Russia have created tremendous pressure for Indonesia and G20 actually. Because if we would like to go further with the pressure, there are some issue here. Russia is the original member of the G20. It is not invite. They are not observer. They are not casual member. They are original member. So to exclude Russia in one of the meeting, Indonesia has to get approval from the whole members. So it is not up to Indonesia to invite or not to invite Russia. It is up to the G20. And we can imagine there will be a stuck and there will be a division in G20 if we put this to G20, the whole G20 member to talk about Russia. Because some countries will definitely support Russia. I mean, they would like to be Russia still in the G20 and others should not. So it is actually not the problem for Indonesia itself. It is problem for the whole G20. And actually the Indonesian tried to suggest an inclusive approach by proposing invite the Russia and put a mechanism of dialogue in the mechanism. I think it is in the right track, because it is in Indonesia a way of solving problems so far. This is the way that maybe different from the Western countries that used to use condemnation and exclusion. But condemnation and exclusion doesn't work for Russia, doesn't work for anybody actually, because we have to bring those who are make trouble in and make them talk and make them responsible for what they are doing. And this is actually what we can do with Russia nowadays. What actually the United States and Western country did to pressure to put pressure on the G20 not to invite Russia is a very neo-realist approach. They try to dominate the institution, the G20, for their own purpose in the expense of other members of the institution. It is not the way the institution, the international cooperation works. Indonesia need to work for more innovative solution and maybe engage for both sides, cooperate with other member countries, and to find compromise. I think we will have to work more harder for to find compromise. And this is another test for Indonesian diplomats. And but the test of diplomacy is not only for the diplomats. Actually, this is also the test of all members of Indonesia. And so the total diplomacy maybe needs to be employed that involve all level of Indonesian stakeholders to understand what kind of conflict it is and try to find agreeable solution. And don't forget, November is still what 6 months away. So there are a lot of things can happen during these 6 months. Let's hope something positive will come up. But at the moment, Indonesia perhaps need to make several scenario, and this scenario can be discussed in all level of stakeholder within G20 and outside G20. I think I have to stop here. I'm sorry, it's raining here in Makassar, so maybe my voice is not very clear, but I think I have said what I need to say, and I'm looking forward for productive discussion. Thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Taufan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. Effie, for the very in-depth presentation. If I may highlight, there are several points I would like to emphasize from your presentation. That the first one was that the media coverage was pretty unbalanced in reflection of the imagery of the war, and then Russia and Ukraine conflict is a war between Russia and the Western countries. However, it also benefits more to the Western countries. And I also noted when you said that there has been a double standard between Russia and Ukraine conflict with the Israel and Palestinian conflict a few days ago. And yeah, on the final note was on the G20, which is becoming more important now than before, and world needs a good economic cooperation to rise from the economic crisis after the pandemic. But then there's also another issue regarding Russia and Ukraine conflict. So Indonesia needs to be very creative for this G20 meeting. So again, thank you so much for the very in-depth presentation, Professor. Now, I think it is timely for us to move on to Professor Hikmahanto. As previously mentioned, Professor Hikmahanto is the rector of the Universitas Jenderal Ahmad Yani. He is also the member of the Dispute Resolution Mechanism for ASEAN since 2009. I believe that Professor Hikmahanto's expertise will deepen our discussion today. With that said, may I now give the floor to you, Pak Hikmahanto, please.
Well, thank you very much, Emir. Before I go any further, how many time do I have?
You will have 15 minutes, Pak.
All right, then 15 minutes it is.
Thank you.
And can the committee put on
Yes.
screen my presentation?
Yes, but they're still putting it on.
All right, good. There we go.
Okay.
Okay,
It's clear,
so here's my presentation. As mentioned, I'm the rector of Universitas Jenderal Ahmad Yani, the university owned by the Indonesian Army. I have to say that, owned by the Indonesian Army. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now let's understand the war first. If we look at the Russia and Ukraine conflict development, it starts with Russians saying that we will launch a special military operation to free Ukraine citizens which have Russian descent and maintain Russian culture in Donbass. Because according to the Russian, they have suffered genocide from the Ukraine government, the central government. Of course, the Ukraine government went to the ICJ now, and they said that whether the genocide being claimed by Russia is in accordance with the Convention on Genocide. It is still going on. The Ukraine government is asking for a injunction to say that Russia has to stop its military actions to Ukraine, which they have the injunction. But a powerful state will just disregard any ruling by international court. This has happened also to the U.S. In the Nicaragua case, or to China in the PCA, Permanent Court of Arbitration on the 9-time issue. Now, according to Russia, they launched the special military operation. It is based on Article 51. And Russia have notified the Security Council that they are launching this military action based on Article 51. Okay? So that is what we know. Of course, the US will say, no, we do not agree. Russia does not have the authority to use Article 51, but instead the United States said that Russia is in violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. Article 2, Paragraph 4 stated that states should refrain themselves from using or threat and use of force in their international relations, and then with respect to the territorial integrity and political independence of a state. So that is being used by the US. Now, of course, as a lawyer, I will say that one fact can be interpreted by two parties differently. And this is what happened in our case. That's why I always said that, if I say that, yes, Russia is in violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4, the question is, who have made me a judge for this case, right? So that's why I always said that for Indonesia, it is best for Indonesia not to judge. Yeah. Not to judge. That's why when Indonesia became the co-sponsor for a UN resolution condemning Russia, I was against it. Because to me, we don't have the facts in hands to say that Russia is in violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4. What I propose, and this is being proposed by the president, our president, is that we use Article 2, Paragraph 4, saying that, look, if you have dispute between countries, between states, then you will settle this by a peaceful means in a manner that will not endanger security and peace, international peace and security. But, when Russia attacked first Donbass, they said that genocide. But then, one day after that, they went to Kiev. The question, why? As mentioned by Professor Effie, Russia probably felt threatened by the idea from President Zelensky that he wanted to join in with NATO. This is a problem for Russia because then you don't have any buffer, right? And once you attack Ukraine, it is an attack to all of NATO members once Ukraine becomes a member of NATO. Right? But then the war developed because military target at first was about the issue of genocide, but then Russia wanted to capture President Zelensky, the same as the US when they captured Saddam Hussein, and then bring him down and then change leadership in Iraq or leadership in Afghanistan, in Libya, so that it will follow the policy of the US, right? Next slide, please. So now, from my perspective, it is no longer a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. From my perspective, as put forward by Professor Effie, it is a conflict between Russia and the United States and its allies and the NATO. Ukraine is only an area of conflict, the same as now Indonesia is an area of conflict for the G20, because the US said that if Russia, the delegation from Russia will come to the forum, the G20, then the US will not come. Prime Minister Morrison from Australia has said the same thing. And Justin Trudeau, to my surprise, has said the same thing. Meaning that they have judged Russia as violating the UN Charter, and then punish Indonesia. Mind you that, punish Indonesia that they will not come to the G20 forum. Even though, as mentioned by Professor Effie, that the G20 is very important for the whole world, because we want to see new way out to the economic situation of the world. We want to see more growth in economy, right? But in any case, we understand that US and its ally condemned the special military operation. And the question is whether condemning Russia's military operation will stop Russia. As Professor Effie said, no, right? Even excluding Russia in various forums, will that stop Russia? No. This is the mistake that I think the US has made with its allies. Thinking that handling Russia is the same as handling, say, Iraq or Iran or North Korea in this kind of issue. Look, Russia has a nuclear weapons. They have the ICBM. Russia have the veto power in the Security Council. Russia is probably 10th largest economy in the world. So you cannot treat Russia the same as Iran, the same as Iraq, the same as Libya. No, that is a mistake. And we know that the US is hesitant in sending its troops and military capability due to the possibility of nuclear war. Because the US understand, once they are involved in the Ukraine war, then Russia will not be hesitant to use its nuclear war. And now we know that Russia is testing its ICBM. That is to show to the US, look, I'm ready to launch the ICBM if you are involved in the war. Because Russia probably does not like the US spending a lot of money and military capability to Ukraine and let the people of Ukraine die for this. This is not right. But this is happening around the world, being done by the US. So, US and its ally strategies to stop the special military operation, condemning Russia, imposing economic sanctions, expelling Russia from various international organizations, including a forum like G20, and military assistance. Now the military target, Russia's military target has shifted. Now it's not about genocide. Now it's not about, making sure that Ukraine is not a threat if Ukraine join NATO, but now it has become a noble war, according to Putin, President Putin. They will fight for a noble war. My interpretation of their noble war, the Russia's noble war, is that they will fight against those who tries to make Russia surrender or Russia as if it is not a big country any longer. That's why Russia launched the Sarmat ICBM test to show the US and its allies that we are capable of doing so, and we need to be recognized as a big power. Next slide, please. So what are the responses from the ASEAN member state to the conflict? First of all, the ASEAN member state foreign ministers have issued an official statement. They are deeply concerned with the war in Ukraine, but they avoided direct criticism of Russia. This is different from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where they say that even though they do not mention the name Russia, naming Russia, but it says that the attack in Ukraine to Ukraine is unacceptable. Of course, people will say they're pointing at Russia, but this is of course different from what in its tweet. When Russia first attacked Donbass, our president stated that stop the war. That is his message, without naming any country, without saying whether this is a just war or not just war. Nothing. And if we look at the responses from the AMS, we know that Singapore is the only ASEAN member state who is consistent with the policy of the US, including imposing economic sanctions against Russia. And now Singapore is the only ASEAN member state listed by Russia as its unfriendly country. Next slide. Now, if you look at the UNGA vote condemning Russia, you see that Indonesia, number 5 there, was in favor. And we were the co-sponsor. At that time, I in the media, I said, how are you going to create peace? Trying to talk with Ukraine and Russia as a mediator, Indonesia as a mediator, but you have condemned one of the party. How are you going to do that? That's why I said, look, for Indonesia, it's best to say that we are abstain in this issue because we want to create peace. But many observers stated, including from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said that, look, Indonesia is being consistent because in 2003, when the US was invading Iraq, or going into Iraq, not invading, I'm judging them, going into Iraq, we condemned the action of the US. But then I said, there are two different circumstances. One, at that time, we know that our people staged demonstration of the UN actions. If we do not condemn the US, it's the people, the anger of the people will be directed to the Indonesian government. Secondly, at that time, we are not trying to create any peace. Right? But for the current circumstances, one, there's no demonstration. Secondly, we are trying to create peace between Ukraine and Russia. That's why I was saying that Indonesia should abstain rather than in favor or even become a co-chair. But in the UNGA resolution to remove Russia from the Human Rights Council, we were abstaining. And this is a right decision because we say that the fact-finding being created by the Human Rights Council has not made any findings yet. They have not made any conclusion. So how are we going to say that there is a, as stated in the photograph, that in Busha there's a lot of people being or died there. Next slide. I hope this is going to be very fast. Okay, what is the potential economic, political, and security impacts of the conflicts for the ASEAN region? Well, Singapore has been listed by Russia as among the unfriendly state of Russia. and Singapore is the only country being listed, among the ASEAN member states. But the impact, of course, mainly on economic, in particular trade and stock and currency exchange. But if war continues to escalate, it may have political security impact to ASEAN region. And if ASEAN member states take side between Russia, it has to take side between Russia and the US. This is going to be very difficult. I'm not saying that ASEAN states will support Russia. No, they will say that we're not going to support the US, because remember in 2019, Macron, French president, stated that the world have been tired of the Western hegemony, and probably it is time for the Western hegemony to end. They've been tired with the US, US war. They've been tired with the UK industry, those kind of things. Yeah. So probably countries like China, countries like India, of course, they will not support Russia, but they will not support the decision or actions taken by the US. Yeah, because they do not want the US to dominate the world. And another problem that we have to face internally is with respect to our public, because now our public, some of them will support Ukraine, but some of them support Russia. Next slide. Okay, so what is the possible implication of the ongoing conflict of the upcoming G20 Leaders Summit? One, the G20 may be unsuccessful if boycott from Australia, Canada, and other allies of the US is realized. The first incident has happened yesterday, a few days ago, in the G20 finance meeting. Yeah, but those delegation walked out. They do not attending the meeting, but they attend the meeting, but they walked out. For Indonesia, walked out is probably acceptable, as long as the head of state and head of government attend the G20 leaders meeting, leaders summit. And I think this has been put forward by the special staff of our foreign minister, Triansa, which he said that it is okay. It is not directed to Indonesia as the chair when they walked out, but it is more because one state they are not comfortable with. That's why they have walked out. But again, it is successful because everyone attend, right? But if there's going to be a boycott, then G20 is at the brink of collapse. If the US and its allies refuse the attendance of Russia, to which China and other countries alike may be against US position and its allies. And the world may enter again into a divided world. Yeah, but not because of ideology or influence, but it is more because we do not want US to dominate the world. Next slide. Thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Amir.
Thank you so much, Prof. Hikmanto. I particularly noted the shared views of yours with Professor Effie, that this war has become a Russia against the US and its allies. I would like to also highlight your statement that the impacts of the conflict mainly on economic, in particular trade and stock and currency exchange. But if war continues to escalate, it may have political and security impact to ASEAN region. And lastly, on the part of G20, you said the G20 is at the brink of collapse if the US and its allies refuse the attendance of Russia, to which China and other countries alike may be against US position and its allies. It's very comprehensive and in-depth, Prof. Thank you so much. Before we move on with the session, I would like to gently remind the viewers that questions could be written in our live chat feature on YouTube, and I will be reading out later on our Q&A session. Now, I think it is time for us to welcome Professor Makarim Wibisono as the third speaker to the floor. As addressed, he is a professor at the Republic of Indonesia Defense University. Previously, he served as Indonesian ambassador for the UN and was the former UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories and the President of Economic and Social Council. I believe his expertise would further enrich our discussion today. So without further ado, may I give the floor to you, Professor Makari, please.
Thank you, Tovan. Good afternoon, distinguished Professor Refi, Professor Hikmahanto, and all friends that participate in this meeting. I appreciate also to Habibie Center who invite me to join, the very, very rich and very important discussion in this afternoon. So I would like to share with you my PowerPoint of my presentation. As you are aware, this issues has been quite a long discussion among elite in Indonesia since February. Yeah, we discussed it, the issues, because this is actually creates such kind of like complication. Yeah, particularly Indonesia is going to be the presidency of the G20. Yeah, while the parties, the Russia and also the Western countries are member of the G20. So it creates such kind of like a question mark that are actually depend very much on the resolutions of the Ukraine conflict. Next, please. As you are aware, this is the map of Ukraine. Yeah, if you see on the eastern part of Ukraine is actually Russia. Yeah, so Russia consider Ukraine is one of the buffer state. Yeah, beside Belarus as well as Georgia. Yeah, because their border are very wide. Yeah, with the country. Next, please. A sign of tension had previously been reported by international media. Professor Ravi explained, that international media is actually controlled by the Western countries. Yeah, so they already published, that there was a tension is coming, in the area. So the Russia is coming with very serious attack to Ukraine, before the 24th of February 2022. Yeah, but on the 24th of February, Russia launched aerial, maritime, and land officers military mission. Yeah, this is actually a very, very comprehensive attack over Ukraine. Next, please. The three entry point, from the north, the Russian offensive came from the border between Ukraine and Belarus. From the south, the maritime campaign penetrated the cities of Odessa and Mariupol from Crimea. The Russian troops came from the eastern part in Luhansk, Sumy, and Kharkiv. Yeah, next, please. 3 days earlier, the government of Russia formally recognized the independence of Luhansk and Donetsk, two provinces in eastern Ukraine with a majority of Russian speakers. Separatist troops loyal to Moscow had occupied the two provinces. Next, please. So, what is the genesis of conflict? Yeah, the genesis of the conflict began with the demonstration of the Ukraine people who were against the decision of the then President Viktor Yanukovych in rejecting trade cooperation between Ukraine and the European Union. Later on, this grievance escalated into a political movement to topple President Yanukovych from power. Yeah. Next, please. So, actually, there is a new policy of Ukraine. Yeah, there is a transformation from Moscow-oriented policy to the European Union. The fall of President Viktor Yanukovych changed the orientation of Ukraine foreign policy from Moscow to the European Union. This policy pivot disappointed Moscow. Yeah, next, please. This disappointment seemed to have run deep, as President Vladimir Putin is adamantly convinced of Ukraine's long past as an integral part of Russia and has sought to simply reunite into one country, as it has historically been the case. Yeah. Next, please. President Vladimir Putin publicly declared that Russia is seeking for the demilitarization of Ukraine. Ukraine's membership in NATO is considered by President Vladimir Putin as a threat to Russia's national security. Yeah, he explained it very clearly about this point. Next, please. Perception of threat, Russia actually observed very carefully about the progress has been taken by NATO toward the former Union Soviet state. In the year 2004, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, and Slovenia joined NATO. This is actually different with the promise made by James Baker, Foreign Minister of the United States, with Gorbachev, in the process of the dismantlement of Soviet Union. 5 years later, in the year 2009, Albania and Croatia joined NATO. 8 years later, in 2017, Montenegro and the Northern Macedonia joined NATO. In 2021, the US even proposed in the NATO conference that Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, as well as Ukraine be integrated into NATO. So this is actually observed closely by the Russians. Next, please. Ukraine option. Geographically, Ukraine is located between the European Union and Russia. From a geopolitical standpoint, Ukraine's current challenging situation is, in part, due to the cataclysmic effect from being located between these two powerhouses. From a foreign policy perspective, however, Ukraine president faces somewhat of a dilemma. On one hand, Ukraine is attracted by the economic development potential through NATO member country. B, on the other hand, Ukraine is influenced by the advancement of Russian weapon system and high technology. C, in other words, Ukraine faces two choices in its foreign policy orientation, asymmetric in nature, either toward NATO or Russia. Next, please. So on Saturday, February 26, 2022, the conflict was deliberated in the UN Security Council, which has the mandate to issue legally binding resolution on issues of international peace and security. However, the US proposal to deploy the Russian attack was rejected by the Russian veto. Russia is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Every permanent member has a veto power. Next, please. The United States then introduced debate on the issues of the Ukraine and Russian conflict into a special session of the United Nations General Assembly on the Ukraine conflict. Eventually, the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly was adopted. Next, please. So, how is the response of the ASEAN Foreign Minister position? Professor Avi already mentioned, about the way ASEAN responded. But I would like to clarify the point so you will follow closely how ASEAN Foreign Minister react to the issues start from the beginning. On the 26th February 2022, ASEAN Foreign Minister declared a joint statement consisting of 3 points. One is deeply concerned over the evolving situation and armed hostility in Ukraine, calling on all relevant parties to exercise maximum restraint and make utmost effort to pursue dialogue through all channels, including diplomatic means, to contain the situation, de-escalate tensions, and to seek peaceful resolution, and doing so in accordance with the international law, the principle of the United States Charter, and the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia. Professor Hikmahanto correctly pointed out that in this statement, ASEAN didn't side with Russia or Ukraine, because they tried to bring the issues, in the possibility of resolving the problem peacefully. Number two, ASEAN Foreign Ministers believe that there is still room for a peaceful dialogue to prevent the situation from getting out of control. So ASEAN Foreign Minister still believe that peaceful dialogue is still available. Number three, for peace, security, and harmonious coexistence to prevail, parties must uphold the principle of mutual respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and equal right of all nations. So, in this first press release of the ASEAN Foreign Minister, has actually put the position of ASEAN in a way that can be do to support the process of mitigating the tensions by peaceful means. Next, please. ASEAN member states did have different views. As told by Professor Effie, or also by Professor Hikmahanto. Singapore expressed its position to impose sanctions to Russia. Myanmar junta was in favor of Russia. Vietnam called for dialogue. Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines are in favor of the resolution. Next, please. So I now would like to bring how is Indonesia is the presidency of the G20 in seeing the problem. If the member country to G20 will see in the opening of the summit that Ukraine-Russia conflict is still unresolved, some of them will utilize G20 to put pressure on Russia. This will create polarization at G20 and will affect the future of G20. Actually, the intention of some founder of the G20 to try to make G20 more significant, because the United Nations is in the process of not responsive, a very important phenomenon in the world. So it is correct that Indonesia sent invitation to President Vladimir Putin to attend the G20 summit, because Russia is a legitimate member of the G20. So I personally consider that it is admirable if Indonesia, as the presidency of G20, with the support of ASEAN, take initiative of bridge the gap between conflicting parties. Next, please. ASEAN may have supported Indonesia as the presidency of G20 if the member countries of ASEAN are able to unify their position. The ASEAN principles are relevant to be utilized in mitigating the Ukrainian conflict. So, finally, if the Ukraine conflict is resolved before the opening of the G20 summit, the member country of the G20 will possible to focus on the substances during the G20 summit. Next, please. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Makarim, for the very in-depth and comprehensive presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, now we turn to the Q&A session. We have a few questions already from our participants, so I will read them out loud to the speakers. But first one, if I may, I have a question myself. So this is to all speakers. In the early days of this war, some observers still believed that the war could be ended as long as Russia finds a graceful exit mode. This approach was tried before through a number of meetings, such in Belarus and Turkey. But as the war have now escalated, do you think there is still a chance for a face-saving exit for Russia that can lead to a peaceful resolution? Or it is next to impossible to think of it now, as mentioned by Professor Hikmahanto, that Putin already considered it as a noble war, which means that he will fight till the end until Ukraine surrenders? That's the first question. Please, whoever want to start first. Well, Prof. Hikmanto, you are still on mute.
I'm sorry. If I may, Prof. Evi and Prof. Makarim, let me start first. Well, of course, there should not be, I mean, the effort to make peace has to be a continuous effort by countries around the world, including Indonesia. And we should not be tired, or we say that there is no an option for Russia, Ukraine, Russia, and NATO to settle their differences. Well, I have always mentioned in the media that Indonesia can be a mediator, not because the Republic of Indonesia, but with the head of the presidency of G20. Indonesia is the president of G20. Now, what we can do is we can go to the US and ask the US and NATO to have a written guarantee that they will not accept Ukraine as a member of NATO. This is to say that Ukraine should remain neutral. And if it is not enough, we can go to the UN. Prof. Makarim may know the technicalities of this issue, and then ask the UNGA to issue a resolution similar to Jerusalem, where Jerusalem is a city. It is being internationalized, the city. So there's no quote-unquote countries that will try to dominate in Jerusalem, even though now Israel has has violated the UNGA resolution on that, because they've moved their capital city to Jerusalem. And if we secure that, then we go to Russia. As you mentioned, Taufan, Russia need to have an exit, safe facing. If we can offer to Russia that the US is agreeable to a written guarantee that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO and NATO will not expand more and more, and there's going to be UN resolution, UNGA resolution, yeah, maybe Russia would say, yes, I would be willing, because this is what I refer to as safe facing. For Russia, the war has been costly. I thought that Russia will attack Ukraine for about like 1 week or one and a half week. Once they have captured Zelensky, then that's the end of it. But now it's difficult to find Zelensky in the capital city. The people in Ukraine, which the Russians thought that they will be welcome, the troops from Russia, but now they have to face a fierce fighting from the Ukrainians. So meaning that they are not welcome, the Russian troops in Ukraine. But Russia, of course, cannot surrender. For them, it's a point of no return. It's either they achieve their military target, or they will prolong the war. But if Indonesia can offer to Russia that we have secured this from the US and from the UN, hopefully Russia will say, okay. And that is a big achievement for Indonesia in time where Indonesia is currently the president of G20 and facing this kind of issue by the world, and Indonesia is successful. Well, that is my, my thought on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Hikmanto. Please, Professor Makarim.
All right. I believe, that the process of ceasefire will reach before the opening of the G20 summit. Yeah, because as you are aware, that Turkey already acts as a mediator between Russia and Ukraine. Yeah, and then in practical, actually, the issues of Russia is willing to accept that Ukraine become the member of European Union. But the news that I got, yeah, that Ukraine also accept, yeah, that Ukraine will not be a member of NATO. Yeah, but the problem right now is how is the low-hanging the Donetsk and Luhansk, yeah, that most of the population are Russian speakers, yeah. So I think the issue is something like this. Yeah? When the Crimea conflict happens, yeah, the process of concurrence of Ukraine is very fast because there is no support from the Western country to Ukraine. Yeah, very short. But now, yeah, even the NATO and the Western part are not party to the conflict militarily, but they're sending troop. Yeah, they're sending weapon. Yeah, to Ukraine. Yeah, the most sophisticated weapon also go there. Yeah, so actually, Ukraine is not just Ukraine alone, but Ukraine supported by the Western weapon system. So therefore, the reaction is become longer. Yeah. So now I consider that the China and the Russian have a policy to control the Mariupol as well as the uh, Luhansk and Donetsk, yeah, in a way that they are there during the resolution of conflict. Let's see, how will the negotiation that took place under the mediation of Russia will follow. But I support the idea if, for example, Indonesia is supporting as a presidency of G20, also supporting the process in order to clear that everybody try to such kind like flexible in seeing the agreeable future in Ukraine.
Thank you, Prof. Makarim.
Yeah.
Please, Professor Effie.
Thank you for the question. I think this is an interesting question, and we usually observe something post-mortem, and now we have to see something prediction. Yeah, in international relation, we actually don't know what will be until it's happened, but we can work on a scenario. We work usually on scenario and scenario based on the most dominant or significant variables. If you see what happened in this war, the variables of Russia, the variable of Ukraine, and the variables of Western world, I'm quite pessimistic. Why? Because first, uh, Russia is under pressure now, and still a big pressure on Russia to win the war, and it already what use so much resources. So and then face shaping diplomacy has not been also face shaping solution has not also been emerged so far. I think it will be difficult for Russia to stop. However, an option to persuade Russia to stop for another reward, for example, to make Russia not as the world enemy, maybe can be can work for Russia. But we also understand that Russia have other allies, China and other non states that usually against United States. Now seems like they are backup Russia. So this variable that can shape Russian option is quite mixed between the one negative and the one positive. However, the variable for the Western countries also mixed. If we stop with Ukraine, if even the war in Ukraine stop, the Western country already put a lot of arms in Poland. Several weeks ago, we learned that Poland already received uh, Western countries' strategic arms to be in their land. I'm thinking this is another trigger for another war for Russia. So maybe even if Ukraine will the war in Ukraine will stop, another war will be in the future too with Poland. And Poland, if we see in the media, Poland president has expressed very strong sentiment also against Russia. So we see actually in the on this uh, western border, Russia is actually still in around the not friendly neighbors. So this is maybe another factors then make the scenario is not so bright. We can identify several other scenario. What I see, what I try to mention here, I have no at the moment. I cannot decide because we need more data and more calculation and see more scenario. But of course, there are three scenario as usual. The most extreme, pessimistic, the most positive, and somehow in the middle. Maybe we have room to to open more rooms for the someone in the middle and for Indonesia and other countries to participate in the peace process. Indonesian position as president of G20 is important, but I'm doubt it will be too much for Indonesia also to hold so much responsibility for the for to be the arbiter or mediator of this war. I think Security Council should take more step on this. Uh, I'm saying this because considering Indonesian resources, and we try to concentrate on the G20 main agendas, the substance. To be to be mediator, you need not only the skill, but also the resources and credibility, etc. So many things. So even if Indonesia maybe would like to take that position, Indonesia need to cooperate with other credible mediator too. And so far, there is not there is no news about Indonesian cooperation with Turkey or etc. And what I heard is another mediator is Israel. So this is another another strange circumstances for Indonesia. Again, I don't think at this point I know the answer. But that's very provocative question, and I think we need to talk. We need to think more about this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Afi. Thank you, professors. The second question, this is from Iwan from Ministry of Defense. The question is also to all speakers. So, in addition to having an impact on the global economy, mapped allied countries, does this show the preparation of a new world order? Please,
I yes, if I may,
please.
I think this is maybe one of the step toward that because if we back to the theory, the rise and fall of major powers, the period when the old hegemonic is going away and the new hegemonic is not coming yet is the most destabilized time. So maybe this is the time where we see the hegemonic powers is going fading away, and the challengers not yet established itself as a major power, and we see the world order actually is not sufficient enough. Even though we have United Nations, we have international law to prevent war. Not we have seen the war is still, and the war in Ukraine is in the middle of what we call civilized world. So who else you can ask for a more peaceful area? But I think maybe this is part of this transition world order, uh, in the and it is a test in the United States too. So that's why I see why the United States and Western countries very much support Russia is because of part of that. Because they don't want to be perceived as fading away. They would like to show that they are still exist and they're still able to dictate the world, and they want to be acknowledged as still the hegemonic powers. Whereas Russia tried to challenge, and I'm sure other countries like China and others that are not in favor of the United States are also trying to to contribute to the new world order. I think maybe this is the time that we have to see transitional world order. Another point, I'm thinking if there is a uh, there is a stuck in a G20, if United States in other Western country decide not to participate, if so, we may not have G20. We may have what, G10, G12, and maybe this is another movement too. Because remember, G20 was established to help G7 to manage the global world economy during the crisis in 2008. They enhanced the previous meeting of the Minister of Finance and central bank governors to the to one step higher summit, because they need help from emerging countries. So if this forum will be obsolete because of their pressure, so I'm sure emerging economies in G20 still have room for themselves. Well, we still have to see how far China will react, of course, because China is the biggest economy among those emerging countries. But China's position will be very important to see what kind of world order we will see in the future. We don't know the time, maybe how many decades, but I don't think it's in the short time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Afi. Please, Professor Hikmahanto.
Okay. Well, I do agree that we're going to enter into the new world order. As I mentioned, a divided world, but not because of communism, liberalism, that sort of thing, but between whether countries will still accept Western hegemony led by the US, or they will not accept the US hegemony. That's one. Secondly, it may be divided because of the economic issues. Even though we understand that you cannot discuss world's economy when you are divided. Yeah. So yeah, that's my answer to this. I'm sure that there's going to be a divided world after this. It's not easy for the U.S. and its allies to have a trust on Russia, and I don't think Russia and many countries have a trust to the U.S. anymore.
Thank you, Professor Hikmahanto. Please, Professor Makarim.
All right, thank you so much. I'm leaning toward to support the idea of that the world may be entering the process of formulating the international world order. Because why? Because the current global governance now is not working very well. Yeah, as you are aware, for example, on the issue of international conflict, yeah, actually United Nations is designed to resolve the problem. Yeah, if you see the Charter of the United Nations, Article 1 and 2, yeah, because the role of the United Nations is actually to maintain international peace and order, yeah, international peace uh, and order, yeah. But in fact, you see, yeah, the Syria crisis, more than 500,000 has been killed. But what can United Nations can do? Nothing, yeah. You also see that there are more than 500,000 people in Myanmar was moved, yeah, from the country to go to Bangladesh, yeah, which is actually very clearly it is not in line with the international law. But what can the United Nations do to help? Nothing. Yeah, so it means that the current global governance that are working based on the formula created in 1945 is no longer in line with the current geopolitics and current geostrategic in the world. They need adjustment, yeah, in order to be able to be responsive to the current process. Yeah, I still remember when I was assigned in the United Nations and listened how the way the member of United Nations consider, yeah, the ineffectiveness of the Security Council, and they consider that this happened because there is no democratic process in the United Nations system. Because the problem, the mechanism that has been followed by the United Nations is old system derived since the beginning of the United Nations in 1945. Yeah, the constellation of political structure in 1945 is different with the political structure now. Yeah, so therefore, situation in uh, uh, Europe, yeah, particularly in Ukraine, is indication of a step toward the formulating of the new international order that we are expected to be something that actually happen to help the situation of the effectiveness of the current global government.
Thank you, Professor Makarim.
Pak Tovan,
Yes,
Mas Tovan,
yes,
may I, if I can go further with Pak Makarim question, may I?
yes,
Uh,
please, yes, please.
Professor Makarim, your last point about the new global, who do you think will be the actors?
I think there are so many country are actually disappointed with the situation right now. Yeah, so the actors means that the new power actually now, for example, BRIC. Yeah, BRICS now is becoming very powerful. Yeah, China is belong to the BRICS. Yeah, and they are actually be possible to work together with India, together with also with the other country that I actually want to see the improvement of the global situation right now. Because now, yeah, if I may say in order openly discuss, yeah, that among the major power leaders, there is loss of trust, yeah, which is actually different with the situation in 1945, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Yeah, there is a loss of trust. There's the deficit of trust among the leaders of the major power. Yeah, so there is a need to have such kind like a approach, a new approach to create such kind of. Secondly, yeah, that there is such kind like a irrelevancy between the high politics and low politics. Yeah, and then there is such kind like the differences between the economic policy and foreign policy. In the past, during the beginning of the China development, Japanese investment play a major role to try to develop the China's economy. But when there is a problem of Senkaku Island, right now, right away, the problem between Russia and China has become so critical, antagonism between that. Yeah, so meaning that we should address about the deficit of trust among the major powers. There should be a new national order that can bring about something more agreeable and then more trustable. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Makarim. I hope it also answers the question that brought up by the audience on YouTube. We have another question. This is also for all speakers from Fadel from University of Indonesia. What has happened in Ukraine, Russia, can also happen to other countries and regions. Is it possible for Southeast Asia, the Indo-Pacific, or South China Sea to become the next battlefield for the major power? How relevant is ASEAN? How prepared is ASEAN to anticipate and overcome the said possibilities? Thank you. Please, any speakers would like to comment first?
If I may.
Yes,
well, when the war in Ukraine happened, a U.S. delegation came to Taiwan, and they signed an agreement with the Taiwanese authorities that says that if Taiwan is being attacked, the Republic of China is being attacked by anyone, then the U.S. will assist them. Of course, we understand that if Republic of China, because now we have People's Republic of China and Republic of China, one country that has to say governments. The PRC said that it's okay. But once Republic of China declare its independence, then PRC will attack Taiwan. Of course, they will say, look, what I'm doing is securing my country. What I'm doing is policing those who try to make a separatist movement. But based on that agreement, the US will assist Republic of China, Taiwan. My question is, what is the difference then between Russia and the Republic of Donetsk and Luhansk? Because Russia, before they attacked Donbass in the eastern part of Ukraine, they first recognized the two republics. And then they have a security pact. And based on this, they exercise Article 51, which says that self-defense, not only an individual self-defense, but also a collective self-defense. Right? Meaning that the battlefield can be, in Asia, especially within China. And the question is, how are we going to react? How are we going to look into this issue? Yeah. It may be the same, but the difference is it is not Russia, it is the US. Will the US say that, well, because there is a democratic value that we have to uphold? Mind you that the ROC, according to the US, has a democratic values and they respect human rights, as opposed to China, then it is right for us to defend Taiwan against China. So that's going to be the next battlefield, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other speakers would like to comment on this?
I agree to support Professor Hikmahanto, because the issues of uncertainty of international law is actually now dominate in world affairs. So issues like how is the future of Taiwan? Based on the intention of Russia, the intention of China, is actually very important in creating such kind like global structures, taking into account the dynamic of the opposition. I agree also, if you see the process of Russia to the perception of threat, they believe on Gorbachev who leading the country, and then they got report from Gorbachev that Mr. James Baker, the Minister of United States, promised, that there will be no extension of NATO to the Eastern Europe. But as you are aware, in 2004, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, Slovenia became NATO members. After that, Albania and Croatia, and then Montenegro and Northern Macedonia became also members. So what has been said earlier by the leaders, is not actually kept by all the conflicting parties. So if that's the case, what will be the guiding principle of behavior of the country in the future? So therefore, I'm leaning toward to see the new world order that are more rule based, that are more actually respect the commitment that has been already achieved by the conflicting party. So this make the world become more safe and will become more prosperous. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other comments before we move on to the next question? Prof. Effie, you are still on mute.
Yeah. Thank you. I think this is interesting. I'm thinking it. Yes, Taiwan is made like what Professor Hikmahanto explained, but I'm also thinking in the Southeast Asia, the closest country that is possible to be something like Ukraine is perhaps the one in the border of China, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, and this is also the things that the lesson I said ASEAN has to learn, that being a country next to giant, next to big powers in the region, for example China for Asia, is very dangerous if you take sides. So the best for ASEAN is not to take sides, and ASEAN work with all major powers, and ASEAN and Indonesia should ensure that all ASEAN countries do not take sides, so they will not have to experience what happened with Ukraine. This is the role of ASEAN, I think, and the ASEAN centrality is more important in this sense. So, and to convince countries in the border of China that being supporters of any of the major powers is not benefit for the long term because of this case in Ukraine. So it's the best for ASEAN to keep in quote neutral and not to take sides, and but to cling to ASEAN itself. And ASEAN as a whole will play to both sides, not only to Russia and China, but we also welcome other major powers. So with that, I think the role of ASEAN will be much more important now to make sure that ASEAN member will not follow the step of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I
Yes,
think
please. Yes, please, Prof.
more and more countries will follow Indonesian footsteps in practicing the free and active foreign policy. Why? Because if you take side to the U.S., as mentioned by Macron, that the Western hegemony will soon fall probably. But you cannot trust China. China, a big country, but I don't think countries will have a trust on China or even to Russia. So I think it is best for countries to follow the footsteps of Indonesia. They will not taking side, but of course it will depend on their national interests. Today they can be a friend to the U.S., but tomorrow they can be a friend to China and to Russia, and so on and so forth. Similar to Indonesia. I always said that Indonesia is a friend to everyone, to every state. So we are not taking any side. Yeah. But of course, those countries, those big countries, will say that Indonesia is an opportunist, so they're only taking advantage. Yeah. But as long as it is for our national interest, why not? Thank you.
I have one point in this. The Indonesian who active and independent and active foreign policy is actually not no, no I mean it's a strange by several people, because when I teach in Japan, in China, in Australia, they think it is irrational. You are not big power and you don't have somebody who help you, who protect you if you are attacked, because in their mind, country like Japan, Australia, they always have a big power as their partner, to their protectors. And for them, the decision like Indonesia is irrational. And I think we have to educate the world that actually we don't have to choose. We can have our own and work with all parties and create another rooms for cooperation rather than for conflict. I think we have to educate the world about there is a not white and black, but there is a rooms, and the world is quite colorful. And for China is also interesting. One of Chinese students once asked me, if you are friend with one country, then we will see you that we will see that you are like them. So that's why she at that time wonder why we have friends with United States, why at the same time we have friends with China. Because she said, because if you are friend with them, you are like them. I said, no. If we are friend with China, we are not Chinese, and we not necessarily believe in China, what Chinese believe. But we have our own position. But we can be friends even if we are in the different ideology, different state of interest, etc. So I think we have to educate the more people that we don't have to be in one side. They cannot just claim that if you are not with us, we are with them. I think it is a very close-minded perspective, and we try to. In my class, I always try, especially for foreign students, try to explain Indonesia create big rooms for their foreign policy. It's not white and black only. This for the Asian one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Effie, Professor Makarim, and Professor Hikmahanto. We have a last question, if I may, to all speakers. Could any speakers respond? This is from Arya, by the way. Could any speakers respond to this opinion that is held by some observers? Putin himself was a good example of double standard approach. He questioned the world why no condemnation on Israel within the context of Palestinian-Israeli conflict, including in the events where Israel attacks Palestine. This implies that he recognizes that no country can attack another sovereign country, but he himself launched an attack against Ukraine. Russia was even involved in the shooting down of the Malaysian Airlines airplane 8 years ago, based on the outcome of an independent investigation that was conducted a few years after the tragedy. Any comments? Your
I'll
signal.
have a take. Yeah, sorry. I'll have a take on this. First of all, on issue of use of force. Under the UN Charter, use of force may not be invoked. Under the UN Charter, use of force may not be invoked by any country because they say that, look, we've had enough with the use of force, except for Article 51, self-defense, and mandated by the UN, Article 42. Okay? But in reality, everyone will invoke Article 51 when they are attacking. The same as Russia. When they attack to Ukraine, they're using Article 51. Because they will argue that what I'm doing is, this is an anticipatory self-defense. The same as Israel when they attack Palestinian, especially Hamas. They will say that this is an anticipatory self-defense, right? And mind you this, prior to the World War II, the secretary who is responsible to defense or war, it's referred to as Secretary of War in the US, for example. Department of War. Now everyone will say Secretary of Defense or Department of Defense. But still, they may use the attack from the perspective of other countries as an illegal act, as a violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4. So when Arya mentioned about why is it that Putin cannot accept Israel attack against Palestinian, but he can accept the attack against Ukraine, because as I mentioned, from the other perspective, Russia's against Israel, it is a violation. But when it comes to Russia, then they will say that I'm using Article 51. I have the right to do so. I have notified the Security Council when I first attacked Ukraine. And this has happened also with the US. And from the observers' point of view, of course, this is what they refer to as a double standard. That's why, from the very beginning of attack from Russia to Ukraine, I never say, I never judge, whether this is a self-defense or this is an attack on the territorial integrity of another state. Because it's going to be very difficult. But once you are judging that this is a violation to Article 2, Paragraph 4, then you will be sided with the US. But if you say that, no, this is the right of Russia to exercise its right to self-defense, then you will side to Russia. Yeah. And the question is, if you are taking side, how are you going to create peace? For me, the free and active foreign policy, one of the interpretation is Indonesia at any time should create peace and any human tragedy around the world. Yeah. So that is my perspective. Even though a lot of people will say that, Pak Hikmahanto is more of supporting Russian than the Ukraine. That's not my intention. When I try to explain in the media that, if you look at this war, of course, there's going to be two perspectives. The perspective from the US and the perspective from Russia. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Hikmahanto. Please, anyone would like to comment on this?
Yeah, I was the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, so
Yes.
I know how was the situation faced by the Palestine people, that they are suffering very much, on the policy taken by the Israel, as well the way the Israel attacked Gaza, and also now recently in the mosque. So I see, that's actually the word very quiet, on the situation. I was in question with Palestine family in Jordan, and they are all blame at me. The United Nations can do nothing, to see, the attack against the Palestinian and the way the Palestinian was treated by the Israeli, so, well, on the other hand, something happened in Ukraine, the way reaction taken by the media was so massively against the position of Russia. Professor Evie mentioned the way the Western country control the media. That actually can dictate the direction of the media coverage on it. But as you're aware, this politicking of the fact, actually will actually be resolved to another way in order to resolve the situation. Because I was aware how can a country, that consider that they are threatened by the neighboring countries, toward their countries, and then they will keep silent. I still remember why President Sukarno, reacted so harshly when there was a movement of United Kingdom, in this area, to counter Indonesia territory. So therefore, it is understanding. It's understandable. There's the Russia behave on it, because they consider the Ukraine behavior in Donetsk and Luhansk like Adolf Hitler or the Nazi taking in the Poland, because they trust, they push the Russian speaking population in Luhansk and Donbass area in a way that it is discriminated against the Ukraine speaking people. So therefore, back again, there are double standard. There are two-way actually doing the same thing. But with a different reason. So I think it is about time for us to seek for an alternative of new world order that can be such kind like provide a better word to address such kind like conflict that are actually going to be happen and happen again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Makarim. Professor Effie.
My point about double standard is unavoidable if you have interest. If you don't have interest, maybe you can avoid double standard. But if you have interest, you have to protect somebody or you have to support some. Then you apply double standard, and it happened. And the Western country has applied a lot, and to some extent, other countries also done it. But I think the development of media and the development of social media and technology, where everyone now can be the journalist, citizen journalist is everywhere now with TikTok and YouTube. I think the double standard can be problematic because a lot of people then find proof that what you said is not in what you have said 20 years or 2-3 days ago or 2-3 months before. So I think the role of civil society and more what you call the broader use of social media will help to force those who are double standard not to be to be say what they talk, and this happened with many countries in the world, including Indonesia. Actually, we talk about other country, but somehow it's happened also in our own country. So maybe we start with ourselves, and then we have credibility to tell people if we do our homework. I just that's all I would like to say at this point. But double standard is something that we find everywhere.
Thank you so much, Professor Effie, Professor Makarim, and Professor Hikmahanto. I think it is safe to say that we've come to the end of today's discussion. I would like to thank our three speakers, Professor Effie, Professor Hikmahanto, and Professor Makarim, for your insights on this issue and for all your comments and responses. It has been an immense honor for me and the Habibi Center to have you as our speakers today. I would also like to thank our participants for taking part into today's discussion and have been very active, asking a bunch of very great questions for our discussions today. Apologies, as not every questions could be addressed today due to the time constraints. But nevertheless, I hope all of you have enjoyed our webinar. Have a blissful Ramadan. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you in the Habibi Center's future events. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Taufan, Prof. Makarim.
Hello,
Take care, everyone.
Effie,
Thank you so much.
Pak Taufan.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you
Bye.
for a very good charging.